Hey scholars, so yesterday you started writing your paragraph about beaks and how they help birds survive. Today we're going to finish it up with doing our second detail and our conclusion. But I want to review again what we did yesterday. So yesterday we did our focus statement, which was our first sentence that tells the reader what our paragraph will be about, and then we did our first detail. So when we looked at our focus statement yesterday, you looked at the question, how do birds use their beaks to survive? So that is what our paragraph needs to be about. So you use this question to make a statement. And for my example, I said, beaks help birds survive. And again, your sentence is probably different than mine. This is just my example. Then our second step we did was our first detail. And when we did our details, we had to pick one of our birds to talk about. So yesterday I picked the one for hooked, which is our eagle. So my first sentence for my first detail, I had to tell about how the beak looked, which is hooked. So I changed hooked because remember, is hooked a sentence? Is that a complete sentence? No, it's not. So I can't just put hooked and say I'm done. So I said, some birds have hooked beaks. So I have my word hooked. So now I described what type of beak I'm talking about. Now that was step one of your detail. Step two, you remember we're talking about how the beaks help the birds survive. So now I had to go next door in our chart where it says, how does this beak help the bird survive? So here it said tears, scales, and flesh. And again, is that a complete sentence? No, so I had to turn tears, scales, and flesh into a complete sentence. So then I put, these beaks help tear scales and flesh so the birds can eat. So when we wrote our first detail, we actually really wrote two sentences. The first one described what the beak looked like, and the second one told us how it helped it survive. So together it says, some birds have hooked beaks. These beaks help tear scales and flesh so the birds can eat. So now today we're going to do the same thing, but we have to pick a different bird. So I can't do the eagle again. I just did that one for first detail. So now I'm going to look at our chart and think about which one do I want to do for my second detail. And I'm going to go with the skimmer. So again, our first part is we're using how we describe the beak. So it says uneven. And again, I have to think, is uneven a complete sentence? No, so I have to think of a way to make uneven into a sentence. So I'm going to kind of go off of how I put here. Some birds have hooked beaks. Instead of hooked beaks, I'm going to say some birds have uneven beaks. So I'm using the same thing, except instead of putting hooked for yesterday, I'm putting uneven. So I'm going to put some birds have uneven beaks. I put my period. That's my first part of my detail. Now remember, we're not finished because now I have to say how those uneven beaks help birds survive. So now I have to go back up to the chart to see what it says. So for our uneven beaks, next to it says it's used to trap fish. So again, I have to think, is trap fish a complete sentence? No, it's not. So now I have to think about how I can turn that into a sentence. So again, just like the other day, I just said these beaks help, and then I finished my sentence. So I'm going to do the same thing. So some birds have uneven beaks. These beaks help, and then on our chart it said trap fish. So again, my first sentence describes what the beak looks like. Some birds have uneven beaks, so it tells about what it looks like. And then the second part says how it helps. These beaks help trap fish. Now that we did our focus statement and our two details, we're ready to write that concluding sentence. And remember, the concluding sentence lets the reader know that we're finished. And normally when you're doing a concluding sentence, it is similar to our focus statement. So I'm going to go back to look at our focus statement. I put beaks help birds survive. But I can't put the exact same thing because that wouldn't make sense. I can't put the same sentence. So I have to think of another way to write that. Or think about what did we talk about. So I'm going to go back to our details. It said, some birds have hooked beaks. These beaks help tear scales and flesh so the birds can eat. Some birds have uneven beaks. These beaks help trap fish. So now I'm ready to think about my conclusion sentence. So I'm going to put how beaks help, again we're talking about birds surviving, help birds survive by, and we said how it tears scales and flesh, by tearing scales and flesh and by trapping fish. So I'm going to put my period to see if that makes sense. So now I'm going to go back to see my sentence. It says, beaks help birds survive by tearing scales and flesh and by trapping fish. So all I did was take how our first beak helped the bird survive and how our second beak helped the bird survive. And I put that together to make my ending sentence so the reader knew that's what we talked about in our paragraph. So your job today is to pick a second bird to write about. So you're going to look at our chart and think about which bird you want to use today. Then your first sentence will be about what does the beak look like. The second part will then describe how that beak helps the bird survive. Once you finish that detail, then you'll write your conclusion sentence to end your paragraph. Can't wait to see your hard work.